This video is about ultraviolet fluorescent tubes, and notably this dubious one called an ultraviolet C UVC germicidal tube. And the video was inspired by an event fairly recently in Hong Kong where someone inadvertently chose the wrong type of ultraviolet tubes and caused skin damage to people attending the event. So let's take a look at ultraviolet. Now, the visible spectrum extends from infrared to red, and it goes on through the other colours, yellow in the middle, to blue, and then it goes further into ultraviolet. But the ultraviolet is actually divided into 4 sections. There's UVA, UVB, UVC, and then what could be classed as extreme ultraviolet. Interesting things to note. If this is the planet Earth, and this is our atmosphere around the Earth, and that's the sunshine over there, which we don't get much of around here, but having said that, ultraviolet and infrared do come through the clouds. Then the wavelengths have different penetrating capabilities. For instance, UVA, which is the one that's commonly used as sort of blacklight sources, is able to pass right through the atmosphere and get down to the Earth. It's quite a long wave ultraviolet. UVB, I should actually note, let's go UVA, and the sort of frequency range it covers is about 315 nanometer to 400. And 400 is where it's actually starting to go into the sort of blue end of the spectrum. It's that deep violet colour. It's a really nice colour. They used to sell Christmas lights, and they probably still do, in the beyond the blue spectrum, that it was just going into the deeper end. It was just nudging towards ultraviolet. And it was a really nice colour. Quite hard to get though. And also they don't last too long. They fade quite quickly. So then comes UVB, which is commonly found in tanning tubes, which they look like standard white ultraviolet tubes, although they may light various other colours like pink or blue. But they're putting out a mixture of UVA and UVB for tanning purposes. It's kind of specialised. But its wavelength is sort of 280 nanometer to 315. And its penetration is slowed by the atmosphere. So it comes from the sun and it gradually gets weaker and weaker and weaker. So you've got a fairly small percentage of the UVB. So that's A, that's B, and then we go into UVC. UVC, which is in the frequency range of 100 nanometer to, I'm just smudging this everywhere, that's all right. That's the atmosphere absorbing the ultraviolet. UVC, it goes up to about the 280 nanometer mark. And it's the clear tubes that are used for specialist germicidal applications and ozone generation. And it's so easily absorbed by the atmosphere that very little UVC makes it from the sun down to the Earth. It tends to have to be generated quite locally. It's quite an exotic sort of wavelength, because C comes from the sun and pretty much doesn't get far past what they call the ozone layer. And UVC is absorbed by molecules like ozone, oxygen. Apparently the ozone is particularly capable of absorbing it, which is where the whole ozone protective layer thing comes from. But if there's any oxygen up there, the action of UVC on it is to split the oxygen molecules apart into separate oxygen atoms, and when they recombine, they do form ozone. So theoretically, I guess as long as there's much oxygen in the atmosphere in that area, it's going to keep creating ozone. The main applications. Well, the main applications for ultraviolet are special effects, is one of the most common ones, with blacklight blue. Now, these 2 tubes are blacklight tubes. This one's called blacklight blue, and this one's just called blacklight, even though it's it's a white tube, it lights up bright blue. And it's kind of, I used to mix these up when I was younger. I used to think that this was the blacklight blue because it lights up bright blue, when in reality it's to do with the colour of the glass. And the glass itself is Wood's glass. And it's basically a glass with a diffusion of nickel oxide into it. And it's got this really interesting characteristic that it blocks most visible light, but it lets through ultraviolet and infrared. So, for instance, when you take a look at some of the infrared floodlights that you get for CCTV, it may be an ordinary tungsten lamp that's being underrun to put out a lot of long-wave infrared. But by putting this filter in front, it blocks all the visible light, so you end up with that dull glow from it. But the cameras, the CCTV cameras, can easily see the wavelengths that are coming through. And one of the weird things about these materials is that if you look at them with a infrared camera, although they look black to the naked eye, so to speak, when you look at them with the camera, they absolutely look transparent. It's quite odd. The same applies to Coca-Cola if you look at it with an infrared camera, and some black plastic bin bags. The black pigment is purely in the human optical spectrum as such, and it's transparent to other wavelengths. So this is the classic effect, the black light blue, and I'm going to get, got some fluorescent material here, which is grubby workwear, but this will do the job, and I've left the camera on auto exposure so you can actually see this effect. So I'm going to light this. Oh, blimey, it's far too bright, isn't it? And you can see that the ultraviolet stimulates the fluorescent colours. And you can also stimulate this with just ordinary blue light. And I have to say that this is some of the workwear. And in the past, working in Glasgow, particularly on a street called Buchanan Street, where they had, I don't know if it was for architecture or anti-drug use, but all the street lighting was blue. It was using blue metal halide lamps, and it was just so embarrassing because when you walked in that wearing your high-vis work clothing, it just made you light up really brightly. It just looked like a sort of embarrassing and psychedelic. I also want to mention with regard to the work clothing that the grubbiness of the work clothing, if you choose jobs that are considered glamorous, like the entertainment industry, media, the internet, then you'll find that there's a lot more competition for those jobs. If you choose jobs perceived as hard and dirty and menial, then there's not so much competition. So engineering jobs are going to ultimately pay a lot more money in the long run. They're just going to guarantee much better employability. There's just less competition. And as I was mentioning to some others recently, if you do work in a sort of manky sort of industrial environment, it also means that people like the health and safety executive are less likely to turn up and grind their axe on you because they just don't like getting their hands dirty. Yes, it's a snipe at the HSE. I don't care. They're not my favourite organisation. I'm all for safety, but not when it's taken to extremes to the point of being silly. So this is the Backlight ultraviolet tube with the woods glass that gives it the dark look. And this does contain phosphors. This is actually pretty much the same phosphor coating inside, but the difference is the black glass. So this tube is just standard black light. And if I put this one in, it lights up a fairly bright blue. And again, it will stimulate the phosphors. This is probably going to be quite cold, this tube. Let's bring in the high-vis fabric, and again it stimulates the colours, so it balances. It puts out a lot of visible light, but it also puts out the wavelengths that stimulate the fluorescent colours. And interestingly, this is an insect killer tube. Well, I say insect killer, it's designed to attract insects, and yet ultimately, it puts out the same wavelength as this one. The only difference is the outer glass is clear, like an ordinary fluorescent tube. And you'd think, surely, it would be more expensive to make this tube with its dark glass than this one with its clear glass. And yet, the insect killer tubes are more expensive. I'm not sure what the science is. I'm guessing it's just because they're aimed at an industry that, you have to buy them to keep food hygiene and things like that. Although this is the point that some people will point out that insect killers actually blow the insects into pieces and they scatter little bits of insect debris all over the food depending on where they're located. So it's better to keep the insect killers, the zappers, well away from food preparation areas. So this tube, more expensive but ultimately puts out the same wavelength. And some insect killers do use just the Backlight type lamp, probably because it is ultimately cheaper. One advantage of this one is that you can see it's working because it does light up quite bright. So let's put in the next tube, and this is where it all gets a bit shady. You see, this is UVC. Actually, you know what, I should have covered UVB, but let's jump straight to UVC. I'm going to put this in, and I'm going to point out that I'm wearing glasses at the moment. That's quite important because it's lighting up. I'll have to turn the light off for you to see it. And I can bring up the fluorescent fabric again. I can put it in the vicinity and it will kind of stimulate it, but it's not stimulating it that well. It is lighting up, but not as bright as the other ones. And I can also smell ozone now because it's splitting the oxygen into the air from the molecules of oxygen into atoms, oxygen atoms, which are then recombining. And this tube is hazardous. It's if I place my hand on this tube now to expose it to the wavelength that's coming off it of UVC radiation, and then I sniff my hand, it smells like burnt flesh and ozone. It actually smells damaged skin. It smells porky. So I'm going to turn this tube off right now before I expose myself to that wavelength any further. I'll put the nice. No, I'll put my favourite tube in. I'll put the Backlight blue tube in. And it's the reason for this video is because of this tube, and I'm going to put a link in the description down below. There was an event in Hong Kong run by a fashion brand called Hypebeast, and someone chose the tubes. I don't blame them. They thought they were interesting tubes, visually nice effects with that ghostly blue glow. They didn't know there was any harm in it. They had this mannequin, it was all futuristic and spacey, and they had these tubes. I'm not sure what they used the pink ones. I'm guessing it might have been tanning tubes, but the blue ones, they actually used the germicidal tubes, and someone went back the next day when they experienced health problems, shall we say, and took pictures revealing that it's a clear tube. And I'll put a link to that article in the description down below so you can read yourself. But what's interesting is that the people that went to that event and were exposed to the UVC suffered eye damage and skin damage. You see, ultraviolet causes keratosis of the eyes, and that's equivalent to welding arc. If you expose your bare eyes to this, and I have to mention this time that just ordinary glass will stop that happening. If you remove the phosphor off this tube and just had the bare mercury vapour glow, then it wouldn't actually pass significant harmful ultraviolet. It would look ghostly blue like the tube does when it's lit at the moment. But this glass is a sort of quartz-based glass. It has to be a quartz-based glass to pass that particular wavelength of ultraviolet. Ordinary glass would block it, and that's why I've always preferred glasses with glass lenses, because they do offer, by default, they block the harmful wavelengths of ultraviolet light. They will pass. They have to pass. These are photochromic lenses. They change colour with the ultraviolet light, but it's only the longer wavelengths that affect them in that way. I also want to mention that this tube is a mercury discharge tube. It's basically the quartz tube. It's got the heated cathodes at the end of the coating on them, and then there's mercury vapour in this. And there is virtually no, but you can't see mercury in there. It's invisible because it is just a tiny sniff of mercury vapour. If you ever smash a fluorescent tube, the risk from mercury poisoning is pretty much zero. The mercury will just diffuse instantly, what's in there. It's not the case with some of the older tubes that actually had a visible blob of mercury running back. You have to try and clear that up. The biggest hazard with mercury is the vapour, and only in fairly large quantities. The biggest thing from the past was the phrase "mad as a hatter." Hatters used to use a very hot tub of mercury, and they used to press felt into it to shape it, because the volume, the mass of the mercury meant you could really press stuff into it. And because it was heated, it acted like a liquid iron effectively. But it's that mercury vapour that allows it to enter your body. I would quite happily play with liquid mercury in the hand without any qualms about that. It's the vapour and large quantities of vapour at that cause the problem. But the amount in a fluorescent tube, if you break it, I'd be more concerned about the broken glass. I'd be more concerned in older tubes about some of the phosphors, but I wouldn't be concerned at all about the mercury. So let's talk about, let's keep talking about the event, Hypebeast, and what happened. Now, someone attended it, lots of people attended it, and it was basically the atmospheric lighting. It was loud disco music, dance music, whatever. There's DJ playing music appropriate to the event. And people went home after the event, had a good time, and they noticed that they were suffering sunburn, and that was including black people. Now, black people have natural protection in their skin. They've got a lot of, I'm guessing, mostly melanin in the skin because they're a human optimized for use in sunny parts of the world. And I don't normally associate sunburn with black people, but with UVC, because it's a completely unnatural on-earth wavelength of ultraviolet, a destructive wavelength, they had all the symptoms of sunburn, peeling skin and blisters on their skin. And they also woke up in the middle of the night with the keratosis thing where your eyes have been damaged by the ultraviolet. It doesn't penetrate very deeply. There's this thing that the longer wave ultraviolet is actually more harmful in the sense that it can penetrate deeper through the skin. But the shortwave ultraviolet is the most reactive and causes the most, initial damage, so to speak. And the keratosis thing, you wake up in the middle of the night and it feels like you've got sand in your eyes and there's nothing you can do. You can't wash it out. You can't stop the discomfort of it's like someone has literally thrown a handful of sand in your eyes, and it's there because the surface of your eye has actually been pitted slightly by the effect of the ultraviolet. And it's not a permanent thing. It will, hopefully, if you've not been exposed for too long on a regular basis, your eye will recover. It takes a few days. Adding anaesthetic drops can give some relief, but can sometimes slow down the recovery process. And when the person who attended that club and got the keratosis of the eyes, and they woke up and they sought medical attention, they were told it can be caused by things like arc flash from welding. It can be caused by ultraviolet light from the germicidal tubes. They thought, oh, right, okay. And they went back to the event and they took that picture of the tube, which is probably bad news for the organisers because it means they can't hide the evidence anymore. More of the story, if you ever do something like that, if you realise things are going wrong, hide the evidence really quickly because then it's much harder to tell what happened. Top tips. Let's talk about UVA and B, because if you go to a sunbed, I was hoping to get a UVB tube, but to be honest, what you actually get with a UVB tube is mostly UVA, which is the bright blue, with a little touch of the UVB in the region of maybe just a few percent to about maybe 10%, and these are optimized for tanning. And the two main applications for UVB are the sunbeds and the requirement of some reptiles to have a sort of emulation of sunlight. And there's an interesting characteristic of UVA and B. You can get facial solariums. Philips used to sell them that were based on the standard Backlight type tubes, but actually in the insect type attractant tube. And they've got a cluster of the tubes and a sort of curved panel, and you sit with your face thrust into it for a frontal face tan. I'm not sure why people would do that. And the UVA is the bit that stimulates the melanin, the natural pigment in your skin, to actually change colour and darken, but it's very short term. UVB actually stimulates the production of melanin in your skin. So by combining the two of them in the sunbeds, the UVA is the bit that gives you that instant tan, and the UVB is the bit that gives you that prepares it, that just primes your skin for that. And people who work outdoors all the time already have quite a high melanin content in their skin because they've been exposed to it over their life. And ironically, the people who work in the sunshine all day long are less likely to get harmful skin cancers, the more destructive skin cancers, than people who live in, an environment where they're in an office, where they're sheltered from ultraviolet exposure. And then summer comes and they go out and they sunbathe, or they go to these sunbeds and just burn their bodies with intense ultraviolet to get a fast tan. That's where you're going to get those problems with the skin cancers. What is the name I'm looking for of the skin cancer? I've forgotten the name of that, but it's probably a good thing because it's not very nice, is it? Melanoma. That's what I was looking for. It's horrible. But so I found myself that when I work outdoors, well, I've spent most of my life working outdoors. I find that because I'm Scottish, I've got pale skin, but after the winter, if I'm exposed to a lot of sunshine, I do routinely put on sunblock to try and block the initial exposure. But once I've got a modest exposure again, I'm quite happy to work in the sunshine because your body it's designed to acclimatise to that. What can I say about? I think I've more or less covered everything. I tend to jump about a bit when I'm making these videos, so there's a very good chance that I've missed bits. Let's talk about UVC again and what its actual function is. Its actual function is designed to be used in fully enclosed fixtures for either air sterilisation. It's used in air conditioning to clean the air and sterilise the air and sort of create ozone. And the other applications are for water sterilisation. It's all down to sterilisation because of its destructive nature on just surrounding organisms and molecules. It's one of it's the prominent wavelength of ultraviolet that can actually split DNA. It's quite destructive indeed. So you get water filters that the water is flowing across this. You also get submergible ones that go into fish tanks and rely on the glass to shield it from the people looking at the fish tank, but they expose the water directly. But most of them, it's in a sort of black or other colour enclosure, with the water flowing through it over the surface of the tube so that it gets exposed to that ultraviolet and gets sterilised. And it's used for sterilising well water and ponds and swimming pools and water treatment plants. There is another wavelength of ultraviolet, another band, and it's the extreme ultraviolet, but it's only used in specialist scientific applications. It's the one that extends from about 10 to 100 nanometers, and it can't penetrate even air very deeply. So they have to, if they're going to use it, it tends to be used in sort of vacuum type environments. I think I've covered just about everything. I've covered not to use these. Oh, here's the thing. You go on eBay. I got all these tubes off eBay, and you type in ultraviolet lamp, and it doesn't discriminate. It doesn't actually give any warning in the Chinese listings. It doesn't say, these are harmful, don't expose yourself to them. It just sells them. The keyword here is germicidal and water treatment. But there are no warnings on those listings. And I even found one that actually referred to this tube as Backlight, which is wrong, because you don't want people to find that. Particularly if it's a cheap tube from China and they find the other options are kind of more expensive and they buy this one thinking it's going to be a great disco effect. And then they put it in the room and then notice, well, skin problems, sunburn, sore eyes, and that strange smell it gives off, the ozone smell as it breaks up the molecules in the air. So, the moral of the story is if you want black light, if you want ultraviolet, you want to go for the visual effect, you want this black light tube. If you're looking for tubes for your insect attractor, you want to go for, well, the bright blue version called black light, or you can use black light blue in it, although there's no obvious indication it's, still working. It could go out and you wouldn't notice. If you want suntan, not that I'd recommend it, go for the solarium type lamps, but note that they tend to drive them really hard for a short lifespan for maximum ultraviolet. And if you want germicidal applications, the only one that's going to work for the germicidal application is this tube that is often found in things like baking and catering equipment inside the machine, where at night time they go through a cleaning cycle and all the conveyors run bathed by the ultraviolet light to kill bacteria on them and sterilise them. So yes, when you're buying ultraviolet tubes, be very careful what you get. The clear one is actually really dangerous.